It's one of the most frequently visited locations in the old world. The Nether Hub is the one location that binds everything else together. But how exactly did it come to be? And how did it go from looking like this to the current version that exists today? When I originally opened the old world as a realm in 2019, I wasn't really sure what to expect. My hope was that I'd be able to recapture some of the magic that originally drew me to Minecraft in the first place. But for so long, I had disconnected myself from the greater Minecraft community. For the most part, if I did play Minecraft, it would either be solo or with Elite Triple X and my cousin, Gay Bars. I wasn't watching any Minecraft YouTubers to any real extent. I wasn't part of any groups discussing the game. Both myself and the old world just kind of existed in our own little bubble. What I would soon come to learn, though, in those first few days of being a realm owner, is that a certain set of expectations had developed around public realms. And it was fascinating to me that in a game that's all about the imagination, where you literally start out with nothing and can go anywhere, that the player base itself had standardized concepts like a shopping district, currency, and Nether Hub, to the point that it was seen as unusual for a somewhat established world not to have them. The people who joined around that time got a kick out of some of the nostalgic old school builds, cobblestone towers and carpets made of wool blocks, but it quickly became a question of where do we go from here? It then became my priority to get the old world realm ready. And as I started seeing people branch out and leave the borders of the original map, it was clear that a Nether Hub would be essential in keeping everyone connected. So I began looking into different design concepts, eventually coming across a video with a style I wanted to emulate. I knew I was going to make several modifications along the way, but the compass design fit perfectly with what I wanted to shoot for. By this point, we were a few months into the start of the realm. Skyscraper 2 had recently been demolished and replaced with the Exchange, and I thought that this would be the optimal location to house the main Nether portal, since everyone would already be coming here to check their mail. We were still a ways away from the 1.16 update, which would completely overhaul the Nether. It had only been announced the previous month, and while the original Nether did have open and expansive parts to it, the spot where I needed to sink the portal was not one of those areas. This meant that I would have to clear a ton of netherrack before I could even begin working on the Nether Hub itself. I had drawn up a set of blueprints and estimated that it would be somewhere in the area of 67,000 blocks I'd have to mine beforehand. And this tedious, monotonous project is what Minecraft became for me for months afterwards. The limited amount of free time I had available was now dedicated to hacking away at netherrack. Anything I could do to inch closer to a completed Nether Hub. And while I was preoccupied with that, the player base in the old world had begun to dwindle down, until there were only a handful of us left. But what kept me motivated was the satisfaction I hoped to feel when it was finally completed. When I eventually got a decent portion of the netherrack cleared, I began to plot out the layout of the Nether Hub by utilizing the blueprints I had prepared beforehand. But since I was just grateful to be doing anything aside from clearing netherrack, I got overly ambitious in my building and failed to properly spawn-proof the area first. Since I had now opened things up, I had inadvertently made it possible for ghasts to spawn in. So all the glass I had just put down, destroyed, and all the wool I had strategically placed in a pattern burned entirely. And while this was initially discouraging, I ended up liking the look of the flames and decided to leave it in the final design. Now, while I was busy working on this, Mojang was preparing to release the Nether update. While it was obvious that the old world would benefit from a Nether reset, I debated on doing it for a while even after 1.16 had been released. But the original Nether was a nonsensical mess, a chaotic disaster with no rhyme or reason to it. And so many chunks had been generated by that point that it was proving difficult for anyone to locate the new content. But I had already invested a ton of time into the Nether Hub project, and I wasn't about to lose all this work with a reset. So using MCC Tool Chest, I realized that I could essentially do a partial reset, and I deleted everything outside of the Nether Hub itself, which is why the Nether Hub has the appearance of being encased in a giant block of netherrack today. With the reset behind us, I was in the home stretch of the project. The clearing was completed, and the building was well underway. The Nether Hub was starting to take shape. The remaining active players who just wanted to see it finished would donate resources to help me along the way. And when it was all said and done, the old world officially had itself a Nether Hub. But I wasn't left with that feeling of satisfaction I had hoped for. Instead, I was very underwhelmed with the finished product. It was bland, it was lifeless, and overall lacked personality. And even though I had made it 2 levels tall, the entire space still felt claustrophobic. But I was on a mission to make the old world realm ready. And as far as I was concerned, this project was done. The next thing on my list was a building at spawn. A build which I'd start, but ultimately leave the old world to start the island. And when I returned, I was joined by a new group of players entering the old world for the first time. And this was the first time the Nether Hub would be used on a consistent basis. But it didn't take long for it to become painfully clear that the current design just wasn't going to work. This is what it was like for a player navigating the Nether Hub during this period. I began to notice random blocks being placed in pathways as a visual aid for players, a reference to tell them that this path goes to this location. And while I wasn't a fan of this method of doing things, it became the spark for an idea. But did I really want to completely overhaul the Nether Hub only a few months after it was completed? The answer was no, but if I was going to do it, I planned on tackling every issue I had with the original design. First, it needed character. The layout of the hub wasn't a problem, but those random blocks got me thinking. What if instead of just basic quartz, every entrance was a visual aid? This would make it much easier to navigate as new paths were added over time, while simultaneously adding some much needed color to the build. And what if we took it a step further than that? What if the paths themselves were references to some of the key locations they went to, like stone bricks being a reference to the base of the dome, or bookshelves being a reference to the library? Next, it was too claustrophobic. The lava ceiling, while cool in theory, wasn't really working for me when implemented. Fortunately, the method I used to set it up made removing it a very simple process. The first thing I wanted to do was raise the ceiling up, but I wasn't sure what I ultimately wanted to put on the other side of the glass. What I decided to do was make it a representation of the Nether itself, and I incorporated a lot of what had been added in the 1.16 update. But since I still wanted to use lava, I added the lava streams that would connect the roof to the floor and give the build more depth. Finally, in order to speed the conversion along, I was able to convince Elite XXX to make his annual appearance in the old world, and while I was busy working on the ceiling, I had him replace all the white stained glass with color. But there was intentionality behind this. In doing so, I had him follow the pattern from my original blueprints that were initially intended to be wool blocks. The finishing touch would be a community auto smelter under the main portal. I figured it would be a good location for it since the Nether Hub gets a lot of foot traffic. So you could technically leave the area, but with people still coming in and out of the hub, the chunks would remain loaded pretty consistently to keep the furnaces running. And that's really the story of how the Nether Hub came to be. If asked what my favorite builds are, my default response is usually the tower. Not because I think it's a particularly good build, it's definitely not. That's purely based on nostalgia. But the Nether Hub is definitely up there for me. In terms of how it all came together, the amount of time and effort I put into it, the thought behind how it was laid out, and its overall benefit to the old world, aside from being one of my personal favorites, it's safe to say that it's probably my best.